Today on Locked On Red Wings, 2022 Red Wings players predictions.
You're Locked On Red Wings, your daily podcast on the Detroit Red Wings. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome back to the Locked On Red Wings podcast. We are your hosts, Brian Fisher and Scotty Bentley. I am a podcast producer for WWJ News Radio, and Scotty is the host of Locked On Tigers, as well as a freelance journalist for the Detroit News. Today's episode is brought to you by BetOnline. BetOnline has you covered this season with more props, odds, and lines than ever before. BetOnline, where the game starts. And as we march on through the offseason, first of all, happy August, Scotty. It is now August 1st by the time everyone's listening to this.
August, man. The year is honestly flying by.
Oh, I know.
It's gravy.
It's been absolutely insane. It feels like just yesterday I was working at LCA and stressing out during those game days, man. Those were... Let me tell you, now that I don't work there anymore, I can tell you working retail in a sports arena is stressful. It was very exciting at times. Very exciting because being in the atmosphere is fantastic. But man, was that job. At times it was nutty, especially with those double headers.
I would imagine.
Anyways, not talking about me. The year is flying by, and we're going to start off today talking about player predictions for this upcoming season. We're going to do best case scenario and worst case scenario, and we kind of hashed it out before the show began, Scotty, and we were like, well, if we just talk about our predictions for them, our bias is probably going to be like, oh, yeah, everyone gets better. In reality, that's not the case, but you can't ever predict a player is going to take a huge step back. Some people have models that can do that, but the thing is we're going to do best case and worst case scenario for both players, and this was your idea. You had done it with Locked On Tigers back during the offseason as well, so credit to Scotty for coming up with the idea on today's show.
Well, it's just like, it's such a, for me... I think it's so like clickbaity and just honestly like stupid to try and predict like a player's exact production or stat line or whatever from year to year. Like that's right. Like that's like there's no like merit to a lot of it. If you will come out and you're like, he's going to do exactly this season. But if you give like a range that offers a lot more discussion about like the type of caliber of player you think that somebody is, but it also just I just think it's a more realistic way of like I've always been really big. That's how I've always analyzed or done like player predictions in any sport for like season to season stuff. I've always been really big on ceilings and floors. So
well, and in that vein, then the way we're going to do it today, guys, is we're going to do it one episode per segment, and we're going to start off with the top line forward group today. Obviously, that means Larkin, Bertuzzi, and Raymond. And I think we're probably best off starting with the man everybody's going to be most interested in the season coming up, the captain, Dylan Larkin. He had season-ending core surgery, says to be progressing well. Should, I believe, be ready by the time the season starts. But Dylan Larkin, he had 69 points in 71 games played last season, 31 goals. Very close to a career high form if it were not for the injury. And that injury is going to, I think, play a huge role in our predictions for him. It's going to play a huge part because the season prior to that, his season ended with an injury. This season, it ended with an injury. Dylan Larkin, Scotty, do you think, what's your best case and worst case scenario for him?
Well, I mean, we'll start with the best case scenario. I mean, best case is just you get a full season out of them for starters. I mean, that's the biggest thing. And I guess, in a way you can say that about pretty much anybody. So I don't even like really bringing up injuries into like predictions because there's everybody in any sport ever. You can be like, oh, well, worst case is he only plays half the season or whatever. You know what I mean? So like it's certainly been a thing the last 2 years for him. Even though last year he only missed 10 games, I think last year, 10, 11 games. Just because at the end of the season, they just had him sit out, but he was very clearly, they heavily implied that he was playing through something at the end, but regardless, I think the best case scenario is you get a full season out of him. And I think your best case scenario for Larkin is that he maintains that like just over a point per game status that he had maintained throughout almost all the season until a little bit at the end there before he just decided to go get surgery and shut him down the rest of the year. But so I think best case scenario you're looking at, obviously team success is oriented in all of this, but for him individually, I would say it's a full season and somewhere around like the 90-point mark. I think that would be
That'd be huge.
everybody saying, you know what, like this is again like just reconfirming this is the guy. I'm not sure that I have the guts to say that my best case scenario for him would be like an 100-point season, and not that it's completely impossible or anything, but that I mean I'm not sure. I feel like that's a bar that a lot of people like in their head want Dylan Larkin to like achieve. You know what I mean? I feel like that's the standard that a lot of people want him to hit, and I think he's got to take this step before I can predict that step. You know what I mean? Like his career high in points is 73, so that would be a huge leap forward. So I would say best case, he, like I said, he maintained over a point a game for a very healthy part of the season. So I think best case scenario, if everything goes perfectly and he plays 82 games, if he can put up like a 90-point season, I think that would be everybody considering it a successful season.
Yeah, I mean, if it weren't for that injury this season, he would have absolutely smashed his career best of 73 points. I think he easily would have crossed that 80-point value because there's a large part of the season where he was like 5 points over a point per game.
There was.
And then after the All-Star break, you noticed a huge downtick in his playing ability. He was still putting up decent point totals, but he was playing injured that entire time.
Yeah, they cited the injury all the way back.
Yeah. So if he comes back 100% healthy, I think best case scenario for him is exactly what you said. I mean, absolute living in the best timeline would him being crossing 100 points. But, if he can stay, in my eyes, 90 points would be great. But if he's just a point per game player, but also shores up his defensive side of the puck, because a lot of the advanced metrics show that he still needs to work on his two-way game a little bit. Not that he's bad at it, but if he can become that really dangerous two-way center and still has that production to boot, then he is like a bona fide threat anywhere he is on the ice. And he has that in him.
Right, I agree, and you would hope, and we're going to be saying this a lot, I'm sure, over this series, but you would hope that with the signings and the acquisitions and the players they brought in, that bringing in better defenders around him would then make him also better defensively. So,
worst case scenario though for Dylan Larkin, what do you think that would be?
So it's tough because, again, I don't want to say like, oh, he gets hurt, because again, that's everybody's worst case.
It's also it's a cop out kind of answer.
Right. That's not every single player and that's a professional player in any sport. Worst case scenario is they get hurt and miss significant time. So I'm gonna presume that everyone's playing 82 games and still give my best and worst case scenario. And I would say that the worst case scenario for Larkin would be a sizable step back in production from what we saw last season, right? So like last year we talked, he ended just barely under a point a game, 69 points in 71 games was the final mark there. I think a worst case scenario for Larkin would be like if he's playing 82 games and he's putting up what I mean like he reverts back to like that low 60s point total that he was, what his career high was in 18-19. Before that, 17-18 was when he was at like 63 points. So I think like worst case scenario would be by the end of the season, more so than just like a point total or anything, at the end of the season, if we all look around and go, this guy cannot be a 1C on a championship team, that in my eyes is worst case scenario. Like we can debate over what his floor is in stats all we want, but I think at the end of the day, worst case is whatever leads us to after game 82, the fan base looking around and going, he's not the guy that can be a 1C on a competitive team.
Yeah, you're spot on. I mean, the worst case scenario is that this past season's production was an anomaly, and that in reality, he's actually the 53-point guy from 1920.
Right.
When they played 71 games before the season got shut down, he only had 19 goals. And Um, 34 assists. Now, sure, you can prorate that to 82 and you'd have a few more points, but my point still remains is that worst case scenarios, he reverts back to a mid 50s point player, and his floor, and we realize that he is just his floor of a 2C. Not that that's a bad thing, but I think everyone has higher hopes than that for the captain. But that's why
For
we do
sure.
the best and worst case scenarios. We're not saying either one of these is going to be true, but this is the range in which this next season could go for Dylan Larkin, we think. This is
For
this
sure.
is the prediction, somewhere in that range.
Right, for sure. Well, and then, if you want to do like realistic, I guess what that would be like somewhere in the middle of that. Not realistic's probably not the right word, because I think he realistically could hit
Yeah,
that
I think
best case scenario.
I,
But I think if you want to do, I don't know, like a more modest kind of thing, then you would be again like around, if he just plays 82 games and he goes out there and gives you about a point a game, I think most people are going to be pretty happy with an age 26 season of
I
that.
mean, the truth is, the true prediction is he's going to be somewhere in the middle there, and
Probably.
I think that you're pretty close there. Got to talk to you guys today about BetOnline. BetOnline is the fastest and easiest way to check in on all your betting needs. Find all your favorite sports and events at the number one source for odds, lines, and games. Find reviews and news of every league, including Major League Baseball, NFL, NBA, NHL, combat sports, esports, and even golf. BetOnline continues to be the top online resource for all your sports wagering information, from live betting, in-game scores, and podcasts. They have you covered. Head to BetOnline today or use your mobile device to learn more about the trends and action. BetOnline, where the game starts. Scott, you know what would be fantastic?
You.
I know I'm fantastic. Thank you. If my camera would stop auto adjusting the brightness every time I like leaned forward or back, so that I had this, so I could stop auto adjusting my ring light. It's constantly adjusting, making me look darker, and I'm trying to outshine my blinds behind us.
You outshine everything, Brian.
Thank you. You're very charming today. But because I'm missing that one blind in the middle, that daylight comes through. I might need to just like reposition everything in my room, but I'm also very lazy, so I don't know if I'm going to do that.
A lot of
But
ifs.
a lot of ifs involved in there, and I know myself, and I know that probably none of those ifs are going to come to fruition. Segment 2, Lockdown Red Wings podcast. Let's move on now to what? You want to do Tyler Bertuzzi? We'll finish
Sure.
off with the soon-to-be sophomore.
Sure.
So Tyler Bertuzzi this last season had a fantastic year, posting a career high for himself. He had 30 goals and 32 assists for 62 points and in 68 games played. Obviously, he missed some time due to not being able to play in Canada, amongst other things. But he had a hell of a season, and people were referring to him as a Marchand light, which is one hell of a compliment for the forward. So my question then is the same. Well, same as it was in first segment, is what's his best case scenario?
For me, I think you're looking at a again, like I'll say this with everybody, but like a fully healthy season is obviously first and foremost. But I think best case, I don't expect too much more out of him goal production wise. If you were looking at best case, like I'm not looking for Bert to push 40 goal season, and I don't think he needs to push that to be a first line winger on this team and on a competitive team at that. But I think the biggest thing will be raising his maybe assist totals a little bit, maybe shoring himself up a little bit more on the defensive end, just like everybody else. But just continuing to be that like grit, just menace on the ice, and playing a full season with his style of play. What he had 62 points in 68 games last year. So if you're putting him at about 80 games, I think best case scenario for him would be around 70 points. I mean, maybe if you wanted to like stretch it a little bit more and raise his assist totals, because you think Raymond's going to have a really good year, or Larkin's going to score some more goals too. Like maybe you can raise his assist numbers even a little bit more and put him in like the mid 70s. But that seems like a lot if you're gonna put him back in that high 20s, low 30s goal total. So I think that points wise, I'm expecting about low 70s would be like best case scenario for me. I would consider that a really successful season. Again, assuming that he shores himself up on the defensive end even more and just continues to play that same style of play. All of that with his style of play would be a very successful season to me.
Honestly, I'm right there with you in terms of I don't know how much more I can want out of him. I think Tyler Bertuzzi has pretty much become exactly, and I think honestly more so to a lot of players, given to where he was drafted and what people were saying about him on draft night. He's become so much more of an asset than anyone had predicted. I mean, a lot of people are saying his ceiling was a bottom 6 forward at the NHL level, and here he is, a winger that can play anywhere in the lineup and increase that line's production.
Right.
He has been, I would
Yeah,
argue,
they
almost a
moved him
diamond in
down.
the rough.
Yeah, they moved him down to second line to spread out the production of the scoring.
Like, I know he wasn't necessarily he was taken 58th overall. Like, I know he wasn't necessarily like a 6th round pick, but a lot of people didn't think he would have this level of production given his play style. But here we are. So for me, best case scenario is to do exactly what he did this past season across 82 games instead of 68.
Right.
You know, you prorate what he did this season into 82 games, Scotty. That's 36 goals, 39 assists for 75 points. If you had Tyler Bertuzzi at 75 points at the end of this next season, you'd be handing him a nice contract extension because that is a bona fide top winger that not just has skill, but has the grit to back up his teammates as well. I mean, that's a force to be reckoned with. So I think best case scenario for him is do exactly what he did this season across a full 82 games.
Absolutely. Yeah, no, I couldn't agree more.
So worst case scenario, though, I think for me is just like with Dylan Larkin, this season for Tyler Bertuzzi is an anomaly. And he goes back to being a mid to high 40s points player. And that, he always will have his grit and him being a pest. He'll always have that. But the production takes a step back and you realize that maybe he isn't a top line winger. And then you end up having to sell him at the trade deadline when the team's not playing that well because he'd be a rental.
For sure.
That's a worst case scenario.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think worst case is going back to, before last year was, well, I guess 2 seasons ago now, was the injury year. So excluding 2021, like 2019-20 and 2018-19 are almost copy and paste the exact same production from him. And like all of his stats are almost the exact same. So I think him going and reverting back, and like you said, just that this last season was the anomaly, and he goes back to doing that, and the goal scoring dropping off, I think, would be the biggest thing, because the assist was within like 5 or 6 of what he usually does, but the goal scoring is obviously what went up, 10 goals. So that's the biggest thing I think is if the goal production just like falls off a cliff. And again, like we said with Larkin, worst case scenario would be looking around after game 82 and going, okay, well, we need to find a solidified, top end winger because Bert's not it.
Yeah, because in 18-19 and 19-20, he played over 70 games and had 47 and 48 points respectively, both 21 goal seasons technically. And those are great. That's great production out of a winger with his play style, but that's not top line level production out of a forward. I think in that case, you're looking at him being a middle 6 forward. That's over a half point per game. That's still really good given his play style. But this last season, he showed that he can play on the top line. And the best case scenario for Tyler Bertuzzi is that he proves that again this season, that last season was not a flash in the pan and that he is a goal scorer, that he is a playmaker, and he's the backbone of this roster when it comes to physicality. And that's the best case scenario with him. I don't think anyone would argue that.
For sure. Yeah, no, if you're, again, like if you're just doing like what you think at the end of the season, best case scenario would be after game 82, just being confident wherever they place him going forward.
And extend the mother.
Well, yeah. Extending him is obviously, being confident in extension would obviously be there too. But I think, he's shown that no matter what line he plays on, he's productive, like you said. So I think best case scenario would just be like, hey, we extend Bert and whoever we add and whatever we do with the lines going forward, wherever he ends up playing, we know that he will bring solid production.
Yeah. And I do want to add this too on the Dylan Larkin topic. I know we've moved past that, but just to bring it back, Dylan Larkin's not maybe, well, he is definitely very physical. He's not afraid to stand up for himself, which is one thing we love and hate about him. But when he's on his game and he looks like the over point per game player that we saw this last season, like he has the ability to bring the whole team up with him. When he's playing his best hockey, the whole team is playing their best hockey. You could very much see that. Remember when he was on that streak of scoring the first goal every single game, with for the Red Wings in like the first minute? I mean, what do they say? Rising tides bring the ship up, or whatever the analogy is. I didn't say it right, but you get my gist.
No, you didn't, but yeah.
When Dylan Larkin is on, the whole team's better. And that's why Dylan Larkin, I hope when he has a best case scenario, he'll help fuel best case scenarios for the rest of his team. And so that's why Dylan Larkin is the captain, because he does truly bring up the whole team. So that's why best case scenario for him and Tyler Bertuzzi as well are so vital for this team's success.
Absolutely.
We'll be right back to talk about Lucas Raymond right after these messages. I'm not really good at going to the transition into ad breaks yet, am I? I'm getting used to those. Segment 3, Monday edition, Locked On Red Wings podcast. Lucas Raymond, Scotty. He was a rookie this past year, came 4th in the Calder votes. He had 57 points in 82 games played. One of 3 players who played all 82. 57 points out of a rookie is not bad. He had 23 goals. And what? I'm so bad at math. 34 assists. 34 assists. Thank you.
There you go.
Because the website I use breaks up assist 1 and assist 2, and I always have to combine them together. And that's why I major in math. That's why I got Scotty. He's a mathematician and a writer.
Absolutely not. One of those things.
So Lucas Raymond is probably one of the more interesting ones, because we only have 1 year of data to really look at him and try and predict what he's going to do. But we saw a lot of great things out of this rookie last year. And he came out of training camp going from a guy you didn't expect to make the roster to bona fide right winger on the top line for the Detroit Red Wings. Like there's a big range here with Lucas Raymond and where he could land. And I mean, where do you think his best case and worst case scenarios could be?
Yeah, I think for me, best case scenario with him would be if he bagged a 30 goal season. I think that's a best case scenario for me. If his assist numbers, are about the same, maybe they get a little bit better because the team's a little bit better, but not too much more in that regard. But if he goes out there and has a 30 goal season as a second year player, I think that is best case scenario for me. That would be a mid 60s, high 60s point total as a second year player in 82 games, and would turn him into a pretty legitimate, goal scoring threat.
Yeah, when it comes to Lucas Raymond, I mean, he's so young. So what, 20 years old now to finally turn 20?
This will be his age 20 season. Yeah.
Which is absolutely insane. And he, put up impressive numbers. His goals above replacement percentile were 72% as a 19-year-old in the NHL last season. And he had over 20 goals. So there's a lot to be loved there. I mean, this is a guy who played on forward line 1 almost the entire season. There were a few moments he played down in the lineup, but almost the entire season. He played time on power play and penalty kill 1. With Lucas Raymond, I feel like obviously best case scenario is everything gets better, but he's another player where I also want to see strides taken in the defensive zone. We saw a lot early in the season. Early in the season, he came out like a rocket, and he was doing a lot of great things on both sides of the puck. His hockey IQ was insane. He was doing things to NHL veterans that NHL veterans weren't doing to NHL veterans. It's just he had a lot to show, but I think as teams got tape on him and realized his play style, they learned how to mitigate that. And he was still an incredibly effective player throughout the entire season. But you saw him begin to slow down. I mean, he went from a Calder favorite to 4th place. Not that that's a slight by any means. He finished 4th in the Calder voting, which is amazing, phenomenal. But he did slow down a little bit. So I think here, my best case scenario is for him to not just develop his game, but develop his mind as well to the NHL level so that he can keep up with the pace. His playing style is so smart. Like his whole basis of his playing style is based on thinking, which is such a huge thing. He tends to do the right things at the right time, especially in the offensive zone. If he can just take that a step forward, you're going to see every aspect of his game get better. So 30 goal score, that'd be fantastic. But even if he doesn't score 30 goals, if you see a little bit of an uptick in his production, but also an uptick in his defensive side, best case scenario, I'd be very happy. I think if he can crack 60 points this season, be it through goals, through assists, I don't care. Then clearly his production has taken a step forward. And as long as this team isn't dead last in goals against per 60 again,
right,
then I'll argue his defense took a step forward as well.
Absolutely. Yeah, no. And again, as we've said, already a million times on this episode, and we'll probably continue to say the rest of the team getting better defensively will certainly help all the individuals, and all the other pieces we brought in will help. But yeah, I think 60 points should be the benchmark or whatever for a next step forward, just period. I mean, he put up 57 points in his rookie year, so I think any improvement would be good there. But as far as like best case scenario, yeah, I think it's would be like if he put up a 30 goal season and improved defensively, that would be like the top end best that I could possibly expect out of him.
No, but when you come to the worst case scenario, this is where it gets tricky though, because you hear the term sophomore slump. I mean, Dylan Larkin had a sophomore slump.
Right, that is definitely the fear, yeah.
And this is why when I talk about my best case scenario is basically avoiding the sophomore slump. The sophomore slump is essentially when a player comes in the league and they're fantastic, but then the league, exactly as I said, now knows how that player plays, adjusts. The player doesn't adjust back as fast or counter adjust, whatever you want to say. So they're now all of a sudden doing the same things they did the rookie year, and it's not working anymore because other teams have figured it out. If Lucas Raymond, and I have every belief that he is this smart, is able to avoid the sophomore slump, is able to adjust to the league adjusting to him, and keep his production going on and put on a little bit more weight, which would help, then Lucas Raymond is going to be just fine. But if he can't, and he has a sophomore slump, and he slides back to the low 40s, high 30s, and his defense doesn't get any better, and by the end of game 82, you're looking at him and going, middle six forward right now, that would be a worst case scenario.
Yeah, I think that I don't think no matter what he does, I mean, he would have to have a catastrophic season for people to be like, oh, he's gonna be a middle six forward for the rest of his career. Like, he's 20, but I do think that if he was to get to a point where on a night to night basis, people were like, hey, he shouldn't be in, maybe he'll go back there. Hopefully the hope would be he'd go back to the top line, but for now he needs to not be. That would be worst case. I mean, anything that I don't think anyone expects a catastrophic drop off just because of how talented he was and how good he was last season. But any sort of slight drop off or I mean, like, to be honest with you, even if it was around the same, like even if he ended with like 20 goals and 30 assists, right? Last year he had 23 and 34. If he was around 20 and 30, I think that would be like, I guess that's not worst case scenario, but it would just make everybody go like, okay, like for sure. But we're waiting for you to take the next step kind of thing. But worst case, I agree. Worst case scenario you could draw up for Raymond would be him playing, having a big enough drop off where he is not trusted within the fan base or the coaching staff to be on the top line anymore.
No, I completely agree. And I don't think this is, again, when we talk about these worst and best case scenarios, because I want to hammer this home, these are the ranges. And honestly, in a lot of these guys, especially with the top line, they're closer to the best case than they are the worst case. I genuinely think that. So yeah, this would be the worst case scenario. But like you said, Scotty, it would have to be a catastrophic season for Lucas Raymond, for us to be saying that, and for the Red Wings organization to be saying that middle six forward. Because he has shown us, I mean, listen, I said, talking about his season last year, the league began to adjust to him, which is why he wasn't as effective. But he was still effective because he began to adjust back. So he's shown that he can adjust to the league adjusting to him. So I'm not really all that afraid that he's going to hit hard with a sophomore slump. Just saying that if he did, however small that percentage would be, that would be a worst case scenario. I have full faith in Lucas Raymond, especially, that he's going to be able to adjust and be just as effective, especially playing on a line with Dylan Larkin and Tyler Bertuzzi, which is another thing we didn't really talk about. For one of these guys to have a worst case scenario, all three of them are going to have worst case scenarios, because we saw during the season, they raise each other up. They play their chemistry together, got the best out of each individual player. If Dylan Larkin doesn't have a 30-goal season and have the type of production he has, then Tyler Bertuzzi doesn't have a 30-goal season and the type of production he has. And neither of them have the type of production they have without Lucas Raymond setting them up for their success. And Lucas Raymond got set up a ton by Tyler Bertuzzi as well. So you look at the type of player that Dylan Larkin is, and he is an offense-first forward. You look at the types of goals he scores, it's because he's starting to cheat out of the zone, and he gets a long pass for the breakaway, finishes. Who's giving him these passes? Tyler Bertuzzi, Lucas Raymond. He doesn't have that success without these guys. Their success is very much determined by the success of one another. And that's why I think that you're closer to the best case scenario, because they gel.
Yeah, I mean, for sure. I agree with the one statement you made specifically where you said if one of these guys hits their worst case, it's probably going to take multiple of them hitting their worst case. So it's definitely going to be a team thing. And yeah, this is best, and we're giving you a range, and the hope would be and the expectation would be that the highest percent chance would be that they would fall somewhere, in the middle of that, probably on a little bit of the higher end of that, and a slightly altered bell curve where the peak is slightly on above halfway.
So then let's end it on this. Guys, you can comment on our YouTube video. You can reply to our new episode tweet or Facebook post or whatever. Let us know what you think the best and worst case scenarios, I guess best, worst case, and realistic case scenarios for all three of these players we did today. And I'm going to be asking you guys to do that after every single episode. So give us what you guys think. And, maybe we'll mention it on one of these episodes. Look at your comments and give it a shout out. So, Scotty, any final thoughts, man?
We ball.
Absolutely ball. We'll be back on Wednesday with a new episode breaking down we decided first defensive pairing and one goaltender, right? We're going to alternate between forwards and defense. So it's going to be your first defensive pairing, goaltender on Wednesday. Same time, same place. It's your team every day.
Every day.